Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness happen when we have the least to give. In the harsh winter of 1887, 10-year-old Emma Kate had been living on the streets of Cedar Ridge for 2 years, ever since fever took her pa. Most folks in this frontier town looked the other way when they saw her shivering form huddled near the general store. But when Emma Kate found a wounded dog in the snow, she didn't hesitate to help. The dog belonged to Jasper Crow, the mountain man everyone feared, a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in 20 years. Emma Kate could have kept the dog for warmth and company. Instead, she trudged through the snow to return what wasn't hers. What this gruff mountain man did next shocked the entire town and changed both their lives forever. Would a man who chose solitude over society really open his heart to a homeless child? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air in Cedar Ridge bit sharp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the promise of more snow. Emma Kate pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her small frame as she emerged from the abandoned grain shed where she'd spent the night. Her breath formed small white clouds that disappeared as quickly as her footsteps in the packed snow of Main Street. She clutched her father's old tin cup, dented and tarnished, but still hers, as she made her way toward the general store. The cup had been one of the few things she'd managed to keep when the bank took their little house after Pa died. Sometimes she used it for drinking water from the town pump. Other times, when desperation outweighed pride, she'd hold it out with trembling hands, hoping for a coin or two from the more charitable townsfolk. Emma Kate had learned the rhythms of Cedar Ridge like a wild animal learns the patterns of predators. She knew that Mrs. Whitmore at the general store would sometimes leave day-old bread on the back step around 9 in the morning. She knew Sheriff McKenna made his rounds at precisely 11 and 4, and that he had a soft spot for orphans, though he'd never admit it. She knew that Doc Henley would patch up anyone who came to his door, regardless of their ability to pay, and that his wife would slip an extra biscuit to any hungry child who happened by. Most importantly, she knew how to make herself invisible when the wrong sort of folks were around, the ones who saw a small girl, alone, and thought opportunity rather than compassion. The general store's windows glowed warm yellow in the grey morning light. Through the frost-etched glass, Emma Kate could see Mrs. Whitmore arranging bolts of fabric on the counter. The woman was in her 50s, with greying hair always pulled back in a practical bun, and hands that never seemed to stop moving. She'd been kind to Emma Kate in small ways, never shooing her away from the store's warmth, sometimes pretending not to notice when the girl lingered too long by the penny candy display. Morning. Emma Kate, Mrs. Whitmore called through the partly open door. Cold enough to freeze the devil's breath today? Yes, ma'am, Emma Kate replied, grateful for the acknowledgement. Some days she wondered if she was becoming a ghost. So thoroughly did people look through her. Mrs. Whitmore stepped outside, ostensibly to shake out a small rug, but Emma Kate noticed she left a paper-wrapped bundle on the step. Mice got into some of yesterday's baking, she said without looking directly at the girl. Can't sell it now. Shame to waste it. Emma Kate waited until Mrs. Whitmore had gone back inside before retrieving the bundle. Inside the brown paper she found 2 thick slices of cornbread and a small pot of honey. Her stomach growled appreciatively. She hadn't eaten since the day before yesterday. As she ate, Emma Kate thought about her father. Thomas Kate had been a carpenter, skilled with his hands and generous with his time. He'd built half the houses in Cedar Ridge before the lung fever took him during the brutal winter of 1885. She remembered the way his eyes would crinkle when he laughed, how he'd lift her onto his shoulders to see the 4th of July parade, how he'd taught her to whittle with his old jackknife. A man's worth isn't measured by what he owns. Little bird, he used to say, using his pet name for her. It's measured by what he does when nobody's watching. Those words had stayed with her through the dark nights and hungry days that followed his death. When the bank came for their house, when the neighbors who had once welcomed her father's help suddenly had no room for a grieving child, When she found herself truly alone for the first time in her 10 years, she remembered his lessons about doing right, even when it was hard. The sound of hoofbeats on the frozen main street drew her attention. Sheriff McKenna rode past on his bay mare, tipping his hat to her with a gentle nod. He was a tall, lean man with a salt-and-pepper mustache and eyes that missed very little. Emma Kate had heard the stories, how he'd been a Texas Ranger before coming to Colorado, how he'd cleaned up 3 different frontier towns before settling in Cedar Ridge. But she'd also seen his gentleness with the town's children, the way he'd slip candy to the young ones and make sure the older boys didn't get too rough in their play. "You staying warm enough, Miss Kate?" he called, reining in his horse. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Whitmore's been kindly." He studied her for a moment, and she could see him taking in her thin coat, the careful way she rationed the cornbread. "Doc Henley's wife mentioned they could use some help sweeping out the office later today. $1 worth of work if you're interested." Emma Kate's eyes brightened. A whole $1 would buy her warm food, and maybe even a night in the boarding house. "Yes, sir." "I'd be grateful for the work." "Good. Tell them I sent you around noon." He touched his hat brim again and rode on. But Emma Kate caught the small smile he tried to hide. As the morning wore on, more of the town came to life. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm. Children hurried past on their way to the one-room schoolhouse, their laughter piercing the cold air. Wagons creaked and rumbled over the frozen ruts, carrying supplies and people about their daily business. Emma Kate had attended that same school once, before Pa died. She'd been good with her letters and numbers, quick to learn and eager to please. But there was no place for a homeless child in the classroom, no matter how bright she might be. Education was for children with homes, and families and futures, not for strays scraping by on. Charity and odd jobs. She found herself thinking about the mountain man they called Jasper Crow. Everyone in town had heard the stories, though few claimed to have actually seen him. He was said to live somewhere up in the high country, in a cabin built so far from civilization that even the hunters and trappers rarely crossed his path. Some said he was a former soldier, driven mad by war. Others claimed he was running from the law, hiding some terrible crime in his past. What everyone agreed on was that Jasper Crow was not a man to be approached lightly. He came to town perhaps twice a year, always alone, always silent. He'd sell his furs to the trading post, buy supplies, and disappear back into the mountains without speaking to anyone. Children were warned to stay away from him. Even grown men gave him a wide berth. Emma Kate had seen him once, the previous spring. She'd been hiding behind the water trough when he'd ridden into town on a paint horse, leading a pack mule loaded with pelts. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair shot through with grey and a beard that covered most of his face. His clothes were practical, buckskin and wool, well-made but worn. What struck her most were his eyes. They were the color of winter sky, pale blue and distant. But there had been something in them, a pain that she recognized because she carried it herself. The town had watched him conduct his business with the sort of fascination people reserved for wild animals in cages. He'd said nothing beyond what was necessary, collected his money, loaded his supplies, and vanished as quietly as he'd come. But Emma Kate had noticed things others missed. How gently he handled his horses, how he'd stepped around a cat sleeping in the sun instead of disturbing it, how his gaze had lingered on the children playing in the street with something that might have been longing. Now, as she finished the last of Mrs. Whitmore's cornbread, Emma Kate wondered what it would be like to live so far from other people. Would the silence be peaceful or maddening? Would the solitude be freedom or prison? The church bell chimed 11 times, reminding her that she needed to make her way to Doc Henley's office soon. She tucked her father's tin cup safely inside her coat and stood, brushing crumbs from her worn dress. Whatever the day might bring, she would face it with the same quiet dignity her father had taught her. She was Thomas Kate's daughter, and that meant something, even if the world sometimes forgot. As she walked toward the doctor's office, Emma Kate couldn't shake the feeling that change was coming. The air itself seemed charged with possibility, the way it did before a storm. She'd learned to trust such instincts. They'd kept her alive these past 2 years. She had no way of knowing that before the sun set, she would make a discovery that would alter the course of not one life, but 2. "You're very thorough," Margaret observed, watching Emma Kate carefully sweep dust from the corners where others might have been careless. "Have you done domestic work before?" "Some, ma'am. I help wherever folks will have me." Emma Kate paused in her sweeping. "My pa always said, if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "Yes, ma'am." "He was." Emma Kate resumed sweeping, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she said more. Margaret seemed to understand. She disappeared into the back room and returned with a cup of hot broth and a thick slice of bread. "You'll work better with something warm in your stomach," she said, settling the food on a small table near the stove. As Emma Kate ate, she found herself studying the medical books on the shelves. Many of the titles were beyond her understanding, but she could make out some of the simpler words: anatomy, surgery, diseases. She wondered what it would be like to possess such knowledge, to be able to heal people's hurts with skill and learning. "Can you read those titles?" Margaret asked, noticing her interest. "Some of them, ma'am. Pa taught me my letters pretty well before he got sick. That's a valuable skill. Not many children in Cedar Ridge can read beyond the most basic words." Margaret pulled one of the simpler volumes from the shelf. "This one talks about common remedies, herbs and such that can help with everyday ailments. Would you like to look at it while you finish eating?" Emma Kate's eyes widened. Books had been precious things in her father's house. They'd owned only 3, and she'd read each one countless times. The idea of exploring new pages, new knowledge, filled her with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. The book was Revelation. It described plants she'd seen growing wild in the hills around Cedar Ridge, plants that could soothe a cough, reduce a fever, or ease a headache. Some of the information aligned with folk remedies her father had known, but much of it was new to her. She found herself absorbed in descriptions of dosages and preparations, filing the information away with the same careful attention she gave to memorizing the town's daily rhythms. "You're a quick study," Doc Henley said, emerging from the examination room after his patient left. He'd been watching her read over his wife's shoulder. Most adults struggle with that particular text. Emma Kate closed the book carefully and stood. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to presume." "Nonsense. Curiosity about healing is never presumptuous." He adjusted his spectacles and studied her with professional interest. "Margaret tells me you've been living rough since your father passed." "Yes, sir. Have you been staying healthy?" "The winter's been hard, and I worry about folks without proper shelter." Emma Kate hesitated. The truth was that she'd been fighting off a persistent cough for weeks, and her chest ached on cold mornings. But medical care cost money she didn't have, and she'd learned not to burden people with problems they couldn't solve. "I manage well enough." "Sir." Doc Henley's expression suggested he heard what she hadn't said. "Margaret, would you mind preparing a packet of elderberry syrup and willow bark tea? I believe we have some extra." "Of course." Margaret bustled away, and Emma Kate heard her moving about in what must be a storage room. "The syrup will help with that cough you've been hiding," Doc Henley said quietly, "and the tea will ease the chest aches. Steep 1 spoonful in hot water twice daily." Emma Kate felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "I don't have money for medicine, sir." "Good thing I'm not selling it then." "Consider it payment for the excellent job you've done here." He gestured to the spotless waiting room. "In fact, if you'd be willing to come by twice a week, I believe Margaret and I could find regular work for you. Nothing complicated. Sweeping, organizing, perhaps helping to prepare some of the simpler remedies." The offer was more than Emma Kate had dared hope for. Regular work meant regular income, which meant the difference between mere survival and something approaching stability. "I'd be honored, sir." "Excellent. Tuesdays and Fridays, then. Early afternoon works best." Margaret returned with a cloth packet and a small jar. "The elderberry syrup," she explained, "and enough tea for 2 weeks. And there's a bit of honey in there, too. It helps the medicine go down easier." As Emma Kate prepared to leave, clutching her payment of $1 silver and the precious medicines, Doc Henley called her back. "One more thing," he said. "If you ever find yourself in real trouble, illness, injury, or any other crisis, you come here immediately. Day or night. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Good people look out for each other, he said simply. Your father understood that, and I believe you do too. The afternoon sun was already beginning to slant long shadows across the snow as Emma Kate made her way back toward Main Street. She had money in her pocket, medicine for her cough, and the promise of regular work. For the first time in months, the future seemed to hold something beyond mere day-to-day survival. She decided to walk past the old mill on her way back to her shelter. The building had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since the creek changed course and left the wheel high and dry. But it was quiet there, peaceful, and sometimes she liked to sit by the frozen creek and remember better times. The mill's huge wooden wheel stood motionless against the grey sky, its paddles thick with ice and snow. Emma Kate had just settled onto a fallen log to watch the last of the daylight fade when she heard it, a low, pained whimpering that seemed to come from the shadows near the mill's foundation. She froze, listening. The sound came again, definitely animal, definitely distressed. Every instinct told her to be cautious. Injured animals could be dangerous, and she couldn't afford to be hurt. But another voice, her father's voice, whispered in her memory, "Kindness isn't kindness if it only comes easy. Little bird." Emma Kate rose from the log and walked carefully toward the sound, her heart beating faster with each step. In the deep shadows beneath the old mill's foundation, Emma Kate found him. The dog lay curled against the stone wall, his dark coat matted with snow and blood. He was a large animal, part hound, part something else, with intelligent brown eyes that watched her approach with a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. A gash along his left flank had stopped bleeding, but looked angry and inflamed, and Emma Kate could see that his right front paw was badly swollen. "Easy, boy," she whispered, crouching down but keeping her distance. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog's tail gave the faintest wag, but he didn't try to move. Emma Kate could see that every breath was an effort, and his eyes held the dull glaze of an animal in considerable pain. She studied him more carefully in the fading light. This was no stray or feral dog. His coat, beneath the mud and blood, was well cared for, and around his neck was a leather collar that looked hand-tooled and expensive. Most telling of all, he wasn't truly afraid of her. A wild dog would have either fled or shown aggression. This animal was accustomed to human kindness. "Someone's missing you, aren't they?" she said softly, and the dog's ears perked slightly at the gentle tone. Emma Kate knew she should probably fetch Sheriff McKenna or Doc Henley. They would know what to do, would have the proper supplies to treat the animal's injuries. But night was falling fast, and by the time she found help and returned, the dog might be dead from cold and blood loss. She made a decision that would have horrified any adult who cared about her safety. Moving slowly and speaking in the same quiet voice her father had used with skittish horses, Emma Kate approached the injured animal. "I'm going to look at that collar," she told him. "I need to see if there's a name on it. You stay still now." The dog remained motionless as she gently lifted the leather strap to examine it. The collar was beautifully made, with intricate tooling that spoke of skilled craftsmanship. And there, burned into the leather in neat block letters, was a name, Bear, and below it, "Property of Jasper Crow." Emma Kate sat back on her heels, her mind racing. The mountain man's dog, the feared hermit who hadn't spoken to another soul in 20 years. She looked down at the injured animal and saw him watching her with those intelligent eyes, as if he understood the gravity of what she'd discovered. "So your name is Bear," she said. "That's a good strong name for a good strong dog." Bear's tail moved again, just slightly, but it was enough to tell Emma Kate that somewhere beneath the pain and exhaustion, the animal was still fighting to survive. She had two choices. She could walk away, return to her warm shed, and let nature take its course. The dog belonged to a man who had chosen isolation over society, who wanted nothing to do with the people of Cedar Ridge. No one would blame her for avoiding involvement with Jasper Crow, or she could help. The decision, when it came, felt as natural as breathing. Emma Kate might be homeless and hungry, might live on the edge of survival herself, but she was still her father's daughter. And Thomas Kate had never walked past a creature in need. "All right, Bear," she said, beginning to remove her thin coat. "We're going to get you somewhere warm, and then we're going to figure out how to get you home." She wrapped the coat carefully around the dog's torso, taking care not to disturb his injuries. Bear whimpered softly but didn't resist, seeming to understand that she was trying to help. The coat was barely adequate for Emma Kate in the cold weather. Without it, she would be in real danger of freezing before morning. But the dog needed it more. The next problem was shelter. Emma Kate's usual hiding spot in the grain shed was too small and too exposed for an injured animal of Bear's size. She needed somewhere warmer, more protected, and close enough to town that she could fetch help if his condition worsened during the night. The old root cellar behind the abandoned Garrett place came to mind. The family had moved to Denver the previous summer, leaving their house empty and their property neglected. The root cellar was built into a hillside, well insulated and hidden from casual view. It would be trespassing, but it might be the difference between life and death for the dog. "Can you walk at all?" she asked Bear. But even as she spoke, she could see that he was too weak to stand. She would have to carry him somehow. Emma Kate was small for her age, made smaller still by 2 years of irregular meals and hard living. But desperation and determination could work wonders. She managed to get her arms around Bear's chest and hindquarters, and with a strength born of pure will, she lifted him enough to half carry, half drag him from beneath the mill. The journey to the root cellar, normally a 10-minute walk, took nearly an hour. Emma Kate had to stop frequently to rest, her arms burning from the effort and her body shaking from the cold. Bear seemed to understand her struggle and helped as much as he could, using his good legs to support some of his own weight whenever possible. By the time they reached the cellar, full darkness had fallen and the temperature was dropping fast. Emma Kate's hands were numb as she fumbled with the wooden door, and her breath came in harsh white puffs that dissipated immediately in the frigid air. The cellar was a blessed refuge. Built for storing root vegetables through the winter, it was well insulated and still held the faint warmth of the earth. Emma Kate settled Bear on a pile of old burlap sacks in the corner, then sat beside him to catch her breath and plan her next move. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, and when she checked his wounds by the light of a match, she was relieved to see that the bleeding had stopped completely. The injuries looked painful, but not necessarily fatal. Assuming they didn't become infected, Emma Kate thought of the medical book she'd read at Doc Henley's office, trying to remember what it had said about treating animal wounds. Clean water was essential, and something to prevent infection. She had neither, but she knew where to find both. "I'm going to leave you for a little while," she told Bear, stroking his head gently. "I need to get some supplies, and then I'm going to try to clean these cuts. You rest now." Bear's eyes followed her as she moved toward the door, and she could have sworn she saw gratitude in them. The next 2 hours were a blur of careful theft and desperate improvisation. Emma Kate crept through the dark streets of Cedar Ridge, taking only what she absolutely needed, and only from sources that could spare it. A bucket of clean water from the public well, a bar of soap from the general store's back step, a bottle of whiskey from behind the saloon, not for drinking, but because she remembered her father using it to clean wounds when they couldn't afford proper medicine. Most daringly of all, she slipped into Doc Henley's office through a window she'd noticed was loose during her afternoon visit. She took only what she thought he might not miss immediately: some clean cloth bandages, a small bottle of carbolic acid, and a packet of the willow bark tea he'd given her earlier. If questioned, she would find a way to repay him, but Bear needed help now. Back in the root cellar, she worked by candlelight stolen from the church vestry. Bear lay still as she cleaned his wounds with soap and water, then dabbed them with whiskey, diluted carbolic acid. The dog flinched but didn't struggle, seeming to understand that the pain was necessary. "There," she said when she'd finished bandaging the worst of the cuts. "That should help keep the bad humors out, like Doc Henley's book said." She brewed a weak solution of willow bark tea in her father's tin cup, adding honey to make it more palatable. To her surprise, Bear lapped at it willingly. perhaps recognizing the healing properties by instinct. As the night wore on, Emma Kate found herself talking to the dog, filling the silence with stories about her father, about the town, about her dreams for a different future. Bear listened with the patient attention that only dogs can give, his eyes never leaving her face. "You belong to Jasper Crow," she said eventually, when the candle had burned low and the cold was seeping through even the cellar's thick walls. "Everyone says he's dangerous, that he hates people and wants to be left alone. But you're a good dog, Bear. You're gentle and trusting and brave. Maybe that says something about your master, too." Bear's tail moved slightly at the sound of his name, and Emma Kate took it as agreement. "Come morning, I'm going to take you home," she promised. "I don't know what will happen when I do, but I know it's the right thing. Pa always said that doing right doesn't depend on whether it's easy or safe. It just depends on whether it's right." She settled down beside the dog, sharing her body heat as much as she dared without disturbing his injuries. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now they were alive and warm and together. Sometimes Emma Kate had learned that was enough. Outside the root cellar, snow began to fall again, blanketing Cedar Ridge in pristine white and covering the tracks that might have led anyone to their hiding place. The town slept peacefully, unaware that in a forgotten cellar, a homeless girl and a mountain man's dog were forging a bond that would soon change everything. Dawn came grey and cold, with fresh snow covering the world in deceptive innocence. Emma Kate woke to find Bear watching her with alert eyes, his breathing steadier than it had been the night before. The willow bark tea and her makeshift doctoring seemed to have helped. The dog was clearly still in pain, but the dull glaze of fever had left his eyes. "Good morning," she whispered, checking his bandages. The wounds looked better, no signs of the angry red that would indicate infection. "Ready to go home?" Bear's tail wagged weakly at her voice, and when she helped him to his feet, he managed to stand on his own, though he favored his injured paw heavily. Emma Kate had spent much of the sleepless night thinking about what she was about to do. Walking up to Jasper Crow's cabin was either an act of courage or foolishness, possibly both. But Bear belonged with his master, and she had learned long ago that doing the right thing wasn't always the safe thing. She fashioned a rough sling from one of the burlap sacks to help support Bear's weight, and together they emerged from the root cellar into the crystalline morning air. The dog moved slowly but determinedly, clearly eager to return to familiar territory. The journey into the mountains took most of the morning. Emma Kate had never ventured this far from town, and with each step the wilderness seemed to close around them more completely. The trees grew taller and more densely packed, their snow-laden branches creating a cathedral-like silence, broken only by their footsteps and Bear's occasional soft panting. She had asked Sheriff McKenna once about the trails that led into the high country, claiming curiosity about the trappers and hunters who sometimes passed through town. He'd mentioned that Jasper Crow was thought to live somewhere near Eagle's Peak, in a valley that could only be reached by following Willow Creek upstream for several miles. The creek was frozen now, but its course was still visible beneath the snow. Emma Kate followed it upward, stopping frequently to rest and to let Bear recover his strength. The dog seemed to know where they were going. His pace quickened despite his injuries, and his ears perked forward, as if hearing familiar sounds that Emma Kate could not detect. It was nearly noon when they finally saw it, a thin column of smoke rising above the tree line in the distance. Bear barked once, a sound of recognition and joy, and Emma Kate felt her heart begin to race. There was no turning back now. The cabin sat in a small clearing beside a bend in the creek, positioned to take advantage of both water and southern exposure. It was larger than Emma Kate had expected, built of solid logs chinked with clay and moss. A stone chimney rose from the center of the roof, and smoke curled lazily from its opening. The whole structure spoke of careful craftsmanship and attention to detail. This was not the rough shelter of a madman, but the well-planned home of someone who understood the demands of mountain living. A barn stood nearby, along with what appeared to be a workshop and storage shed. Even in winter's grip, the property had an air of order and purpose that impressed the girl. Bear whined softly and pulled against his makeshift sling, eager to reach home. But Emma Kate held back, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was doing. She was about to disturb the solitude of a man who had chosen isolation so complete that he hadn't spoken to another human being in decades. Before she could lose her nerve entirely, the cabin door opened. Jasper Crow stood in the doorway like something out of a frontier legend. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying dark hair that fell to his shoulders and a full beard streaked with silver. His clothing was practical: wool pants, a leather vest over a flannel shirt, and boots that had seen countless miles of mountain trails. But it was his eyes that caught Emma Kate's attention. Pale blue and sharp with intelligence, they seemed to take in everything at once. For a long moment, man and girl simply stared at each other across the clearing. Emma Kate felt like a deer caught in an open meadow, every instinct screaming at her to run. But Bear chose that moment to bark again, his tail wagging frantically despite his injuries. And the spell was broken. Jasper Crow's gaze shifted to his dog, and Emma Kate saw something she hadn't expected in those pale eyes: genuine relief and concern. The mountain man stepped off his porch and walked toward them, moving with the easy grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness. "Bear," he said, and his voice was deep and rough from disuse, but surprisingly gentle. The dog tried to lunge toward his master, whimpering with joy, and Emma Kate quickly steadied him. "Easy, boy," she said softly. "You're still hurt." Jasper stopped about 10 feet away, his attention now focused entirely on Emma Kate. She could feel him assessing her, taking in her patched clothing, her thin frame, the careful way she supported his injured dog. "You found him," he said finally. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir. Down by the old mill. He was hurt pretty bad, but I think he's going to be all right." Jasper moved closer, dropping to one knee beside Bear and running his hands over the dog with the practiced touch of someone who knew animals well. His fingers found the bandages Emma Kate had applied, and he looked up at her with something that might have been surprise. "You did this?" "Yes, sir. I cleaned the cuts and wrapped them up. Gave him some willow bark tea for the pain, too." Emma Kate felt compelled to add, "I borrowed some supplies from Doc Henley. I'll find a way to pay him back." Jasper continued his examination of the dog, his expression unreadable. Emma Kate noticed that his hands, despite their obvious strength, moved with surprising gentleness as he checked Bear's injuries. "This is good work," he said after a moment. "Clean, careful. Most grown folks wouldn't have done as well." The unexpected praise made Emma Kate's cheeks warm with pride, but she tried not to let it show. "My pa taught me that if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right, smart man." "Your father." Jasper stood and really looked at her for the first time, not just cataloguing her appearance, but seeing her as a person. "What's your name, child?" "Emma Kate, sir." Emma Kate, just Emma Kate. Something flickered in his eyes at her careful omission of a surname, but he didn't press. "Well, Emma Kate, it seems I'm in your debt. Bear here means more to me than most anything else in this world." As if summoned by his name, Bear managed to break free of Emma Kate's gentle restraint and hobble the few steps to his master. Jasper caught him carefully, supporting his weight, while the dog lavished his face with grateful licks. The sight of the feared mountain man being overwhelmed by an ecstatic dog might have been comical in other circumstances, but there was something deeply moving about the obvious love between them. "I was tracking him for 2 days, Jasper said, gently settling Bear on the ground, but keeping one hand on his head. "Lost his trail in the snow south of town. Figured he was dead by now." "He's stronger than he looks," Emma Kate replied. "Fought hard to stay alive. Like his master, I reckon." The words were said quietly, almost to himself, but Emma Kate caught them. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Emma Kate knew she should probably leave now. She had done what she came to do, returned the dog to his rightful owner. But something held her in place, some instinct that told her this moment was important in ways she couldn't yet understand. Jasper seemed to be wrestling with some internal debate. He kept glancing at her, then away, his weathered hands stroking Bear's fur with unconscious gentleness. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. "You're cold," he said, "and you look like you haven't eaten in a while." Emma Kate started to protest, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, betraying her. She hadn't eaten since the cornbread the previous morning, and the long trek through the snow had left her exhausted and hollow with hunger. "Come inside," Jasper said, and it was clearly not a request. "Least I can do is feed you before you head back to town." The offer was so unexpected that Emma Kate could only stare at him. The man who supposedly hated all human contact was inviting her into his home. "I don't want to impose, sir." "No imposition. Besides," he added, lifting Bear carefully in his arms, "someone needs to keep an eye on this fool dog while I get some proper medicine into him. Might as well be the person who saved his life." Emma Kate followed Jasper toward the cabin, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. She was about to enter the private world of Cedar Ridge's most mysterious resident, and she had no idea what she might find there. The interior of the cabin was as surprising as everything else about Jasper Crow. It was warm and clean, furnished with handmade furniture that showed the same careful craftsmanship as the building itself. Books lined one wall, more books than Emma Kate had ever seen in one place. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and something that smelled wonderfully like venison stew simmered in a pot hanging over the coals. Jasper settled Bear on a thick rug near the fire, then moved to tend the stew. Emma Kate remained near the door, uncertain whether she was truly welcome or merely tolerated. "Sit," Jasper said without turning around. "Table, chair, doesn't matter. Just get warm." Emma Kate chose a chair near the fireplace, close enough to keep an eye on Bear, but far enough from Jasper to give him space. The warmth seeping into her bones felt better than anything she could remember. As Jasper ladled stew into a wooden bowl, Emma Kate found herself studying his profile. Up close, she could see that he was probably younger than the townspeople believed, maybe 40, 45 at most. The grey in his hair and the lines around his eyes spoke more of weather and hardship than age. And there was something about the way he moved, a quiet competence that reminded her of her father. He set the bowl before her, along with a chunk of dark bread and a spoon carved from horn. "Eat," he said simply. The stew was the most delicious thing Emma Kate had tasted in months, rich with meat and vegetables, seasoned with herbs she couldn't identify. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out over manners. Jasper watched her without comment, occasionally tending to Bear or stirring the pot. When she had finished every drop, he refilled the bowl without being asked. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is very kind." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," he replied, but his tone held no harshness. "You saved my dog. That deserves more than a meal, but it's what I have to offer." Emma Kate looked down at Bear, who was sleeping peacefully by the fire, his breathing deep and regular. "He's going to be all right, isn't he?" "Thanks to you, yes. Few more days of rest and he'll be good as new." Jasper paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "How did you know to treat his wounds that way?" "Most children wouldn't have known about willow bark tea. I've been reading one of Doc Henley's books about healing and such." Emma Kate hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I've been doing odd jobs for him and his wife. They've been good to me. And your parents? They don't mind you wandering the mountains alone?" The question hung in the warm air between them, and Emma Kate felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever someone asked about her family. "My pa died 2 winters ago," she said quietly. "Lung fever. Mama died when I was born. There's just me now." Jasper's hands stilled on the carving he'd picked up. She noticed now that he was working on what looked like a small wooden bird. "A delicate and incredibly detailed. I'm sorry," he said, and there was something in his voice that told her he meant it. "That's a hard road for anyone, especially a child." Emma Kate nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched Jasper's hands as they resumed their careful work, noting the way his strong fingers could create something so beautiful and fragile. The whittling knife he used was obviously well loved, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. "This is beautiful," she said, gesturing toward the carving. "Did you make all the furniture too?" "Most of it. Gives me something to do during the long winters." He held up the wooden bird, examining it critically. "This one's going to be a wren, I think. Or maybe a sparrow. Haven't decided yet. My pa used to whittle," Emma Kate said softly. "Nothing fancy like that, just little animals and such. He taught me how to hold the knife properly, how to cut with the grain instead of against it." Jasper looked at her with new interest. "Show me." He handed her the knife and a small piece of wood, watching as she positioned it in her hands. Emma Kate felt the familiar weight of the blade, the smooth texture of the wood, and for a moment she was 6 years old again, sitting on her father's lap while he guided her small hands through the careful motions. "Like this?" she asked, making a tentative cut. "Good. Clean stroke, right direction. Your father taught you well." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Jasper on his intricate bird and Emma Kate on what was slowly becoming a simple wooden spoon. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows and reminding them both of the harsh world beyond these warm walls. Finally, reluctantly, Emma Kate set down the knife. "I should probably head back to town before the weather gets worse." Jasper glanced toward the windows, where snow was beginning to swirl more heavily. "That's a long walk in this weather, and dangerous, especially as evening comes on. I'll be all right. I know the way now." But even as she said it, Emma Kate could see that the snow was falling harder and the wind was picking up. The temperature would drop sharply after sunset, and she would be walking directly into the teeth of what looked like a developing storm. Jasper seemed to read her thoughts. "Storm's moving in fast. You'd be risking your life trying to make it back to town tonight." Emma Kate felt a flutter of panic. She couldn't impose on this man's hospitality any further. He had already done more for her than she had any right to expect. But the alternative was almost certainly death in the wilderness. "I have a spare room," Jasper said quietly, apparently making the decision for both of them. "Nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. You can head back to town when the weather clears." The offer was both a relief and a source of anxiety. Emma Kate had never spent a night under the same roof as a strange man, and despite Jasper's kindness, she knew nothing about him beyond his reputation as a hermit. But Bear chose that moment to lift his head and look at her with those intelligent brown eyes, his tail giving a small wag as if to say that she was welcome here. And something in Jasper's manner, the careful way he had treated his dog, the gentle competence of his hands, the quiet respect he had shown her, told her that she would be safe. "Thank you," she said. "I'd be grateful for the shelter." Jasper nodded and returned to his carving, as if offering hospitality to stray children was something he did every day. But Emma Kate caught the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth, and she realized that perhaps this evening would be as much of a new experience for him as it was for her. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in thick quilts and a window that looked out over the snow-covered clearing. Emma Kate sat on the edge of the bed, turning her father's broken pocket watch over in her hands. The timepiece hadn't worked since the day he died. She'd dropped it during the confusion of his final illness, and the delicate mechanism inside had never recovered, but she carried it with her always, a tangible connection to the man who had shaped her understanding of right and wrong. The watch's silver case was tarnished now, and the crystal face was cracked, but she could still see her reflection in its surface, distorted and fragmented, like her memories of the life she'd lost. "Time," her father used to say, tapping the watch's face with one calloused finger, "is the only thing we can't make more of. So we'd better use what we have wisely." She wondered what he would think of her current situation, alone in the mountains with a man the town considered dangerous. Would he be proud of her for helping Bear, or worried about the risks she was taking? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Emma Kate? May I come in?" "Yes, sir." Jasper entered carrying a steaming mug and what appeared to be some folded clothing. Thought you might like some hot tea before bed. And my late wife's clothes are in the chest there. Might find something that fits better than what you're wearing." He set the mug on the small table beside the bed, and Emma Kate caught the scent of chamomile and honey. The mention of a wife surprised her. Somehow she had assumed that Jasper had always been alone. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tea gratefully. "You don't have to, child," Jasper interrupted gently. "When was the last time you slept in a real bed? With clean clothes and a full stomach?" Emma Kate considered lying, but something in his weathered face encouraged honesty. "Not since before Pa died," Jasper nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Then humour an old mountain man and accept his hospitality without argument." He moved toward the door, then paused. "That watch you're holding. May I see it?" Emma Kate hesitated for a moment, then handed over the precious timepiece. Jasper examined it carefully, holding it up to the lamplight and listening to its silence. "Broken mainspring, most likely," he said. "Maybe some damage to the escapement, too." "Your father's?" "Yes, sir. It stopped working when he died. I've carried it ever since, but I don't know how to fix it." Jasper continued his examination, his fingers gentle on the delicate mechanism. "I might be able to repair it. I've had occasion to work on timepieces before. Trappers and hunters sometimes need their chronometers fixed, and the nearest clockmaker is 200 miles away." The offer made Emma Kate's heart leap with hope, but she forced herself to be practical. "I don't have money to pay you. Did I ask for payment?" Jasper's pale eyes held a hint of amusement. "You saved my dog's life. I think that earns you 1 watch repair." He handed the timepiece back to her. "I'll need to order some parts from Denver. Might take a few weeks. But if you're willing to trust me with it, I believe I can get it running again." Emma Kate clutched the watch to her chest, overwhelmed by the kindness of the offer. This man, who supposedly wanted nothing to do with human contact, was offering to restore her most precious possession. "Why?"
she asked.
"Why are you being so good to me?" Jasper was quiet for a long moment, his gaze directed toward the window where snow continued to swirl in the darkness. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. 20 years ago, I had a daughter. Would have been about your age now if she'd lived." Emma Kate felt her breath catch. This was clearly not a story Jasper told often, if at all. What happened to her? "Fever took her and her mother both, same winter. I was away, serving with the army down in New Mexico territory. By the time I got word and made it home, they were already buried." His hands clenched slightly at his sides. "I never even got to say goodbye." The raw pain in his voice made Emma Kate's chest tight with sympathy. She understood loss, understood the particular agony of being powerless to save someone you loved. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been terrible." It was. Terrible enough that I decided I never wanted to care about anything that much again. Figured if I stayed away from people, away from caring, the hurt couldn't touch me. But you have Bear. Jasper's expression softened slightly. Found him as a pup, half dead from cold and hunger. Told myself I was just nursing him back to health, that I'd send him on his way, once he was strong. But, he shrugged, sometimes the heart decides things the mind can't argue with. Emma Kate thought about her father's words, about kindness not being kindness if it only came easy. And sometimes caring about something is worth the risk of losing it. Jasper looked at her with surprise, as if hearing his own thoughts spoken aloud. Yes, sometimes it is. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, each lost in their own memories. Finally Jasper stood. Get some rest. Morning will come early, and if the weather clears, you'll want to start back to town before noon. But as he reached the door, Emma Kate found herself speaking without conscious thought. Would it be all right if I came back sometime? To check on Bear, I mean. And maybe you could show me more about whittling. Jasper turned back, his expression unreadable. Emma Kate immediately regretted the question. She was presuming too much, asking for more than she had any right to expect. I mean, only if you wouldn't mind, she added quickly. I know you like your privacy. I do like my privacy, Jasper agreed. But I also know that Bear has taken a shine to you, and he's a good judge of character. He paused, considering. If you wanted to visit occasionally, just to check on an old dog's recovery, you understand, I suppose that would be acceptable. Emma Kate smiled, the first real smile she could remember in months. Thank you. That would mean a lot to me. After Jasper left, Emma Kate explored the contents of the clothing chest he had mentioned. The garments inside were clearly a woman's, dresses and blouses of good quality, but simple design, all carefully preserved with sachets of dried lavender. She selected a warm nightgown that was only slightly too large and changed gratefully out of her worn dress. As she settled into bed with her tea, Emma Kate found herself thinking about Jasper's story. The man the town feared as a dangerous hermit was actually a father who had lost everything that mattered to him. His isolation wasn't born of hatred or madness, but of grief too deep to bear in the company of others. She understood that kind of pain. After her father died, she had wanted to crawl into a hole and hide from the world's indifference to her loss. The only thing that had kept her going was the knowledge that Thomas Kate would have wanted her to survive, to find some way to build a life worthy of his sacrifice. Perhaps Jasper was finally ready to step back into the world, even if only in small ways. Perhaps Bear's injury and her own appearance at his door were signs that his long isolation was coming to an end. The storm raged through the night, but Emma Kate slept more soundly than she had in years. She was warm, well-fed and safe, luxuries she had almost forgotten existed. And for the first time since her father's death, she felt a sense of possibility about the future. When morning came, the world outside was transformed. The storm had left behind nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, and every branch and fence post wore a thick white coating that sparkled in the early sunlight. It was beautiful, but it also meant that the trail back to town would be impassable for at least another day. Emma Kate found Jasper in the main room, feeding chunks of wood to the fire. Bear was awake and alert, his tail wagging weakly when he saw her. "How is he this morning?" she asked, kneeling beside the dog to check his bandages. "Much improved. The swelling in his paw is down, and he managed to eat a good breakfast." Jasper gestured toward the window. "But as you can see, you won't be leaving today. Trail's buried too deep." Emma Kate tried to hide her relief. Another day in this warm, safe place was more than she had dared hope for. "I'm sorry to be such a burden." "You're not a burden." Jasper's tone was matter-of-fact. "Besides, I could use the help with Bear's care. And there are chores that need doing, feeding the horses, checking the traps, splitting wood. If you're going to stay, you might as well be useful." The prospect of productive work filled Emma Kate with pleasure. She had always been happiest when her hands were busy, when she felt like she was contributing something of value. "I'd be glad to help," she said. "What would you like me to start with?" Jasper studied her for a moment, taking in her slight frame and worn clothing. "First, let's see if we can find you something more suitable to wear. My wife's winter clothes are in the chest upstairs. Might find something that fits well enough." An hour later, dressed in wool pants that had been carefully hemmed to fit her shorter legs and a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of lavender, Emma Kate followed Jasper out to the barn. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but the borrowed coat kept her warm, and the sturdy boots she'd found made walking through the deep snow much easier. The barn was as well organized as the cabin, with neat stalls for 2 horses and a milk cow. Emma Kate had grown up around animals. Her father had owned a horse and taught her the basics of animal care, but she was impressed by the obvious affection Jasper showed for his stock. "This is Sage," he said, introducing her to a sturdy mare with intelligent eyes. "And that's Thunder." The second horse was a magnificent black stallion who nickered softly when Jasper approached. "They're beautiful," Emma Kate said, offering her hand for the horses to sniff. "Have you had them long?" "Sage came with the property when I bought it. Thunder I raised from a colt." Jasper began distributing hay to the animals. "They're good company in their way. Don't ask complicated questions or expect complicated answers." Emma Kate understood. Animals offered the comfort of companionship without the complications of human relationships. They asked only for food and care and kindness, and they gave back loyalty and affection without judgment. She worked beside Jasper in comfortable silence, learning the routine of winter animal care. When they finished in the barn, he showed her his workshop, a small building filled with tools she barely recognized. Works in progress in various stages of completion, and the rich smell of wood shavings and linseed oil. "This is where I do most of my carving," Jasper explained, indicating a workbench covered with partially completed figures. "And furniture making when I need it." Emma Kate examined the pieces with wonder. There were animals, bears, eagles, deer, carved with such skill they seemed almost alive. A chess set with pieces that looked like medieval knights and castles. A jewelry box with intricate inlay work that must have taken months to complete. "These are incredible," she breathed. "Do you sell them?" "Some. Trading post in Durango takes a few pieces now and then when I make the trip down in spring." Jasper picked up a half-finished owl, running his thumb over its smooth curves. "Mostly I carve because I need to. Keeps my hands busy, keeps my mind quiet. My pa always said idle hands were the devil's playground. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Emma Kate hesitated, then asked, "Would you teach me? I mean really teach me, not just the basics." Jasper considered this, turning the wooden owl over in his hands. "Carving takes patience, and it takes a willingness to accept that you'll ruin more pieces than you'll finish, at least at first. I have patience, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I can see that." He handed her a small piece of pine and a simple carving knife. "We'll start with something basic, maybe a whistle or a simple animal. See if you have the feel for it." They spent the rest of the morning in the workshop, Jasper guiding Emma Kate through the fundamentals of carving. She learned about grain direction and tool angles, about the different properties of various woods, about the importance of sharp tools and steady hands. Her first attempts were clumsy, but Jasper was a patient teacher. He showed her how to hold the knife properly, how to use her whole body to control the blade, how to work with the wood instead of fighting against it. "There," he said when she managed to complete a crude but recognizable bird. "You got the instincts for it? With practice you could become quite skilled." The praise warmed Emma Kate more than the workshop's small stove. It had been a long time since anyone had seen potential in her, had taken the time to teach her something. Purely for the joy of learning, they broke for lunch, thick soup and fresh bread that Jasper had baked that morning, and then spent the afternoon checking his trap lines. Emma Kate learned about reading animal signs in the snow, about the different types of traps and how to set them humanely, about the delicate balance between taking what you needed and preserving what you didn't. "Trapping isn't just about catching animals," Jasper explained as they reset a snare that had been disturbed by some larger creature. "It's about understanding the land, understanding the animals, understanding your place in the whole system. Like being part of a family," Emma Kate said, and immediately regretted the words. She didn't want to presume that kind of connection, but Jasper nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, like being part of a family." That evening, as they sat by the fire with Bear sleeping peacefully between them, Emma Kate felt something she had almost forgotten: contentment. For these few hours she had been useful, valued, safe. She had learned new skills and contributed to the work of keeping life going in this remote place. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for letting me stay, for teaching me things." "I know you didn't have to." Jasper looked up from the piece he was carving. She could see now that it was going to be a small dog, possibly even Bear himself. "Maybe I needed the company more than I wanted to admit. Really. 20 years is a long time to talk only to animals and the occasional passing trapper." He paused in his carving. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to share knowledge with someone eager to learn." Emma Kate felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "If the offer stands about visiting sometimes, I'd like that very much. The offer stands. Bear would never forgive me if I sent away his rescuer." Jasper's voice was gruff, but his eyes were kind. "Besides, someone needs to check on my carving instruction. Make sure you're practicing what I taught you." As the evening wore on, they fell into comfortable conversation. Jasper told stories of his years in the mountains, of the animals he'd observed, and the changing seasons he'd witnessed. Emma Kate shared memories of her father, carefully selected tales that painted him as the good man he had been. When it came time for bed, Emma Kate found herself reluctant to leave the warmth of the main room. Tomorrow, if the weather held, she would have to return to her harsh life in Cedar Ridge. The contrast between this peace and her usual struggle for survival seemed almost unbearable. The weather might not clear for another day or two, Jasper said, as if reading her thoughts. Mountain storms can be unpredictable. Emma Kate looked at him sharply, wondering if he was simply being kind, or if he too was reluctant to see their temporary arrangement end. And if it doesn't clear, then I guess I'll have to put up with your company a little longer. The words were stern, but his eyes held a warmth that made Emma Kate's heart sing. As she settled into bed with her father's broken watch clutched in her hand, Emma Kate allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to belong somewhere again. To have a place where she was expected, valued, even loved. It was a dangerous dream, she knew. But for tonight, in this warm room, with the sound of wind in the pines outside, she let herself believe that miracles were possible. 3 weeks had passed since the storm, and Emma Kate had visited Jasper's cabin 4 times. Each visit followed the same careful pattern. She would arrive in the late morning, help with chores, receive instruction in carving or wilderness skills, share a meal, and return to town before dark. They never spoke of the arrangement directly, but both understood its importance. Emma Kate had grown stronger during these weeks, her cheeks filling out slightly from regular good meals and her movements becoming more confident as Jasper taught her mountain craft. She could now set a snare, identify edible plants buried under snow, and carve simple figures that actually resembled what they were meant to represent, but it was the bronze medal she had discovered accidentally that changed everything. She had been searching for a particular carving tool in Jasper's workshop when she knocked over a wooden box tucked behind some lumber. The contents spilled across the floor, a few letters, some old photographs, and a tarnished bronze medal attached to a faded ribbon. Emma Kate picked up the medal reverently, studying the inscription, "For valor in the field, Corporal Jasper Crow, 7th Cavalry Regiment." The date was 1867, nearly 20 years ago. You weren't supposed to see that. Emma Kate spun around to find Jasper standing in the doorway, his face unreadable but his body tense. She immediately began gathering up the scattered items. "I'm sorry. I knocked over the box by accident. I wasn't snooping, I promise." Jasper crossed to where she knelt and took the medal from her hands. For a long moment he simply stared at it, his thumb tracing the raised letters. "I haven't looked at this in years," he said quietly. "You were in the cavalry. It wasn't a question." The medal spoke for itself. For 8 years. Enlisted when I was 18. Served until Sarah died. He looked up at her. "Sarah was my wife." Emma Kate had suspected there was more to Jasper's military service than he had revealed, but she had never pressed for details. Now, seeing the medal and the pain in his eyes, she began to understand why he had retreated so completely from the world. "What happened?" she asked gently. Jasper was quiet for so long that Emma Kate thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly he began to speak. "The army sent me where there was trouble. Indian wars mostly down in Arizona and New Mexico territories. I was good at it, too good maybe. Good at tracking, good at fighting, good at killing when killing was necessary." His voice was flat, emotionless. "They kept promoting me, kept sending me places where other men had failed." He walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered mountains. "I told myself I was serving my country, protecting settlers, doing necessary work. And maybe some of it was necessary. But after a while, all I could see was the blood. All I could remember were the faces of the men I'd killed." Emma Kate remained silent, sensing that this was a story Jasper had never told anyone. "When Sarah died, when my daughter died, I used their deaths as an excuse to leave the army. But the truth was, I was already broken, already lost. The grief just gave me permission to disappear, but you were decorated for valor," Emma Kate said. That medal, it means you did something brave, something important. Jasper laughed bitterly. Brave. I led a charge against a Comanche war party that had been raiding supply trains. Killed 12 men in 10 minutes. They gave me that medal because I was good at violence, Emma Kate. Because I could do things other men couldn't stomach. Or because you protected people who needed protecting, Emma Kate countered. Because you did a hard job that someone had to do. Jasper turned to look at her, surprise flickering in his pale eyes. You don't understand what I'm telling you. I'm not a good man. I've done things. You saved Bear when he was a puppy, Emma Kate interrupted. You took me in during a storm. You're teaching me skills that might keep me alive. You've fed me, clothed me, treated me with kindness and respect. She gestured toward the medal. Maybe you did hard things in the war. Maybe you had to make terrible choices. But that's not who you are now. Jasper stared at her for a long moment, and Emma Kate could see him struggling with concepts he had carried for 20 years. My pa used to say that a man isn't defined by his worst moment, she continued. He's defined by what he does after it, by whether he lets it destroy him or uses it to become better. And what if the worst moments outnumber the good ones? Then you make more good moments, as many as it takes. Jasper was quiet again, turning the medal over in his hands. Finally, he placed it back in the wooden box, along with the other items. Your father was a wise man, he said. He had his moments. Emma Kate hesitated, then asked, why did you keep the medal if it brings back painful memories? Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe because throwing it away would have been too easy. Maybe because forgetting completely would be a disservice to the men who died. He closed the box carefully. Or maybe because some part of me hoped that someday I'd be able to look at it and remember the good things, too. They worked together in thoughtful silence for the rest of the afternoon. Emma Kate could sense a change in Jasper, as if the conversation had shifted something fundamental in his understanding of himself. He seemed more present, more engaged, as if he had been carrying a weight that was finally beginning to lighten. When it came time for her to leave, Jasper walked her to the edge of the clearing, as he always did. But today he stopped her before she reached the tree line. Emma Kate, he said, his voice unusually serious. I want you to know that these visits, they've meant more to me than I can say. You've given an old hermit something to look forward to. Emma Kate felt her throat tighten with emotion. You've given me something too. Hope, I guess. A reason to believe that good things can still happen. They stood there in the gathering dusk, two damaged souls who had found something precious in each other's company. Emma Kate wanted to say more, wanted to tell him how much their friendship meant to her, but she was afraid of presuming too much. I'll see you Tuesday? She asked instead. I'll be here. The walk back to town seemed longer than usual, and Emma Kate found herself thinking about Jasper's story. She tried to imagine him as a young soldier, fighting in distant territories for causes he might not have fully understood. The image was hard to reconcile with the gentle man who carved wooden birds and patiently taught her wilderness skills. But perhaps that was the point. People were more than their worst moments, more than their greatest failures. They were the sum of all their choices, all their attempts to do better, all their small acts of kindness and courage. In town, Emma Kate made her way to the boarding house, where she had been able to rent a small room with the money earned from her work with Doc Henley. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a bed, but it was warm and dry and infinitely better than sleeping in abandoned buildings. Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, looked up from her knitting as Emma Kate entered. You're back late tonight, dear. Yes, ma'am. I was visiting a friend in the mountains. Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. She was a practical woman who cared more about whether her tenants paid their rent on time than about their personal business. Doc Henley stopped by looking for you this afternoon. Said to tell you he has extra work tomorrow if you're interested. Thank you. I'll stop by his office in the morning. In her small room, Emma Kate sat on the narrow bed and thought about the day's revelations. She understood now why Jasper had isolated himself for so long. Guilt and grief were powerful forces, capable of convincing a man that he deserved nothing but solitude and self-recrimination. But she also understood that healing was possible, that redemption could be found in the smallest acts of goodness. Every time Jasper shared his knowledge with her, every kindness he showed to bear, every moment he chose connection over isolation, he was writing a new chapter in his story. Emma Kate pulled her father's broken watch from her pocket and held it up to the lamplight. Jasper had promised to repair it, to make it work again after years of silence. Perhaps that was a metaphor for what they were doing for each other, taking broken things and finding ways to make them whole. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Emma Kate was sweeping the front steps of Doc Henley's office when Sheriff McKenna rode up, his face grim with concern. "Morning, Emma Kate. Is the doc in?" "Yes, sir." "Is something wrong?" McKenna dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. "Maybe. Been getting reports of someone prowling around properties on the edge of town. Thought the doc should know, seeing as his place is pretty isolated. What kind of prowling?" Emma Kate asked, though something cold was already forming in her stomach. "Someone's been watching houses, asking questions about folks who live alone. Particular interest in anyone who might have money or valuables stored away." McKenna's expression was troubled. "Got me thinking about your friend in the mountains." Emma Kate's blood turned to ice. "What about him?" "Well, everyone knows Jasper Crow keeps to himself. Lives way up in the high country, no neighbors for miles. If someone was looking for an isolated target," he shrugged grimly, "just seems like the kind of man who might be worth robbing if someone was desperate enough and foolish enough to try." The possibility had never occurred to Emma Kate, but now it seemed terrifyingly obvious. Jasper lived alone, miles from help, with no way to summon assistance if trouble came calling. Worse, his reputation as a dangerous hermit might actually work against him. People might be less likely to investigate if something happened to him, assuming he had simply moved on or died of natural causes. "I should warn him," Emma Kate said. McKenna studied her with sharp eyes. "You've been visiting him regular, haven't you?" There was no point in lying. "Yes, sir. He treating you well? Not taking advantage?" Emma Kate felt a flash of anger at the implication. "He's been nothing but kind to me. He's teaching me skills, sharing his knowledge. He's a good man, Sheriff McKenna." The lawman's expression softened. "I believe you, child, but others in town might not see it that way. Might think it's strange, a grown man befriending a young girl with no family to look out for her." The words hit Emma Kate like a physical blow. She hadn't considered how their friendship might appear to others, how it might be misinterpreted by people who didn't understand the innocent nature of their relationship. "Are you saying I shouldn't visit him anymore?" "I'm saying you both need to be careful. About the prowlers, about gossip, about a dozen other things that could go wrong." McKenna's voice was kind but firm. "World's not always understanding of friendships that don't fit the usual patterns." Emma Kate nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the implications. She needed to warn Jasper about the potential threat, but she also needed to think about how to protect their friendship from the suspicions and misunderstandings of well-meaning townspeople. As McKenna went inside to speak with Doc Henley, Emma Kate stood on the front steps and stared toward the mountains. Somewhere up there, Jasper was probably working in his shop or tending his animals, unaware that danger might be heading his way. She would have to find a way to warn him. But first, she would have to decide if their friendship was worth the risks that seemed to be multiplying with each passing day. Emma Kate clutched the small wooden doll against her chest as she made her way through the pre-dawn darkness toward Jasper's cabin. She had discovered it that morning, carefully wrapped in soft cloth and left on her windowsill like a gift from some forest spirit. The carving was exquisite. A young girl in a simple dress, her face serene and hopeful, every detail rendered with the kind of skill that spoke of deep affection and countless hours of patient work. She knew immediately who had made it, though she couldn't imagine when Jasper had found the time to create something so beautiful, or how he had managed to leave it without being seen. The doll was more than a carving. It was a declaration, a statement of how he saw her, a tangible expression of feelings he had never put into words. But now, as she hurried through the forest with Sheriff McKenna's warning echoing in her mind, The doll felt like both a blessing and a burden, evidence of the bond between them, but also proof of how complicated their relationship had become. She had spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with the decision to make this trip. The reports of prowlers had grown more specific and more troubling. Men asking detailed questions about property boundaries, escape routes, and the habits of isolated residents. Worse, there had been actual incidents. A trapper's cabin ransacked while he was away, supplies stolen from a remote mining claim, and an elderly hermit found beaten and robbed in his own home. Emma Kate couldn't bear the thought of something similar happening to Jasper. But she also couldn't ignore the uncomfortable truth in Sheriff McKenna's words about how their friendship might be perceived by others. She was a 12-year-old girl with no family to protect her reputation, and he was a grown man with a mysterious past. In the harsh light of social convention, their innocent friendship could easily be twisted into something ugly and suspicious. The pre-dawn air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of snow and pine resin. Emma Kate had become skilled at moving quietly through the forest, and she made good time despite the darkness. As she approached the familiar clearing, she saw light in Jasper's windows and smoke rising from his chimney. He was an early riser, often up before dawn to tend his animals and begin the day's work. Bear heard her coming and barked a greeting from inside the cabin. A moment later, the door opened and Jasper appeared, fully dressed but clearly surprised to see her. "Emma Kate, what are you doing here so early? Is something wrong?" The concern in his voice was immediate and genuine, and Emma Kate felt a familiar warmth at the knowledge that someone cared enough to worry about her well-being. "I needed to talk to you," she said, climbing the steps to the porch. "It's important." Jasper ushered her inside, where Bear greeted her with enthusiastic tail-wagging, despite his barely healed injuries. The cabin was warm and welcoming, filled with the comfortable scents of wood smoke and coffee. "Sit," Jasper said, pouring her a cup of coffee and adding generous amounts of milk and honey. "Tell me what's troubling you." Emma Kate accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warm cup to steady her nervous hands. "Sheriff McKenna came by Doc Henley's office yesterday. There have been men in town asking questions about people who live alone. People like you." Jasper's expression grew serious. "What kind of questions?" "About property, about valuables, about how isolated different places are." Emma Kate leaned forward urgently. "There have already been robberies, Jasper. A trapper's cabin, a mining claim, even an old man living by himself. They hurt him pretty badly." Jasper was quiet for a moment, digesting this information. Emma Kate could see him thinking, assessing, falling back on instincts developed during his military years. How many men? "Sheriff McKenna thinks 3, maybe 4. They've been seen in different places around town, but they don't stay long in any one spot. Professional, then. Scouting, systematically planning their approach." Jasper's voice had taken on a different quality, harder, more focused. "When did the incident start?" 2 weeks ago. They seem to be working their way outward from town, hitting the more isolated places." Jasper nodded grimly. "Which means they'll probably reach this area soon." He looked at Emma Kate with sudden concern. "You shouldn't have come alone. If these men are operating in the area, it's not safe for you to be traveling the mountain trails by yourself. I had to warn you. I couldn't just—" Emma Kate's voice broke slightly. "I couldn't just sit in town knowing you might be in danger." The raw emotion in her words seemed to affect Jasper deeply. He reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That took courage, coming here with this warning. But you've done your part. Now you need to get back to town, back to safety." Emma Kate pulled her hand away, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I'm not going anywhere. If there's going to be trouble, you shouldn't face it alone, Emma Kate." "Don't you Emma Kate me!" she interrupted, sounding for a moment exactly like the stubborn child she was. "I'm not helpless, and I'm not leaving you to deal with this by yourself." Jasper studied her face. Seeing the determination there, the fierce loyalty that had brought her through the forest in the pre-dawn darkness to warn him of danger. "These aren't schoolyard bullies," he said gently. "These are dangerous men who have already hurt people. If they come here, it won't be a situation where courage and good intentions are enough. Then teach me, Emma Kate said. You were a soldier. You know about fighting, about defending yourself. Teach me what I need to know. The request clearly caught Jasper off guard. He stared at her for a long moment, and Emma Kate could see him struggling with competing impulses, his desire to protect her warring with his recognition of her determination and the practical reality of their situation. I can't turn you into a soldier in a few days, he said. Finally, I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to give me a chance to help, to be useful, instead of just another thing you have to worry about protecting. Jasper was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes studying her face, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. All right, he said eventually. But if we're going to do this, we do it my way. Complete trust, absolute obedience to my instructions, no arguments. Can you accept that? Emma Kate nodded solemnly. Yes, good. Then the first lesson is this: fighting is always the last resort. The best way to win a battle is to avoid having it in the first place. He stood and moved to the window, scanning the forest with practiced eyes. We start by making this place as unattractive a target as possible. The next few hours were a revelation for Emma Kate. Under Jasper's guidance, she learned to see his property through the eyes of potential attackers. He showed her sightlines and approach routes, explained how the cabin's position near the creek provided both water access and an escape route, pointed out the defensive advantages of the workshop's stone foundation and the barn's elevated position. Your military service, Emma Kate said as they worked together to move supplies to more secure locations. But it wasn't just fighting, was it? You did other things too. Reconnaissance, mostly. Tracking, scouting, intelligence gathering. Jasper paused in his work. The army needed people who could move quietly, observe without being seen, and report back on enemy positions and intentions. Like what we're doing now. Similar principles, yes. Understanding your environment, anticipating your opponent's moves, preparing for multiple scenarios. He looked at her seriously. But Emma Kate, what I learned in the army, it came at a cost. The skills I'm teaching you now, they're for survival. But the deeper knowledge, the killing skills, those change a person. They leave marks that never fully heal. Emma Kate thought about the bronze medal hidden in his workshop, about the pain she had seen in his eyes when he spoke of his military service. Is that why you've stayed away from people for so long? Because of what you had to do in the war? Partly. When you've seen what humans are capable of doing to each other, when you've participated in it yourself, it becomes hard to believe in goodness, in innocence, in the possibility of simple friendship. But you believe in it now, Emma Kate said. Don't you? Jasper looked at her. This fierce, loyal girl who had risked her own safety to warn him of danger, who was now working beside him with complete trust despite the risks involved. Yes, he said. I'm beginning to. They spent the rest of the day in preparation. Jasper showed Emma Kate how to recognize the signs of human passage in the forest, how to move quietly and observe without being observed, how to use terrain and shadows for concealment. He taught her basic principles of self-defense, not elaborate fighting techniques, but simple, effective ways to break free from a grab or disable an attacker long enough to escape. Most importantly, he established clear protocols for different scenarios. If trouble came, Emma Kate was to follow specific escape routes to predetermined hiding spots. She was not to attempt to fight unless absolutely necessary, and even then, only long enough to create an opportunity to flee. Your job, Jasper emphasized repeatedly, is to survive and get help. Nothing else matters. As evening approached, they made their final preparations. The cabin now looked deceptively normal from the outside, but inside, Jasper had positioned weapons and supplies at strategic points. The most valuable items had been hidden or moved to secure locations. Escape routes had been cleared and practiced. Now we wait, Jasper said, as they settled down to a simple dinner. And we stay alert. Emma Kate fingered the wooden doll she had placed on the table beside her plate. In the lamplight, the carved face seemed almost alive, the expression one of quiet courage and unshakable faith. "When did you make this?" she asked. Jasper's cheeks colored slightly. "I've been working on it for a few weeks. Wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to give it to you. It's beautiful. The most beautiful thing anyone's ever made for me." "You deserve beautiful things," Jasper said quietly. "You deserve a proper home, proper family, a future full of possibilities." Emma Kate felt tears threaten at the gentleness in his voice. "I have something that feels like family," she said. "Right here, with you and Bear." The words hung in the warm air between them, full of meaning and longing, and the dangerous hope that maybe, somehow, the bonds they had formed could become something permanent and legally recognized. But before Jasper could respond, Bear suddenly raised his head. His ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbling in his throat. Someone was approaching through the forest. Jasper was on his feet immediately, moving with the silent efficiency Emma Kate had learned to associate with his military training. He extinguished the lamps and moved to the window, peering carefully through the edge of the curtain. "3 men," he whispered, on foot moving cautiously. "They're trying to stay hidden, but they don't know the forest like we do." Emma Kate felt her heart begin to race, but she forced herself to remain calm. All their preparation had been leading to this moment. "What do we do?" "We stick to the plan," Jasper said, his voice steady and reassuring. "They probably want to scout tonight and attack tomorrow when they think we'll be off guard. So we're going to give them something to think about." He moved to where he had positioned his rifle, checking it with practiced hands. Emma Kate couldn't see his face in the darkness, but she could feel the change in him, the emergence of the soldier he had been, competent and deadly and utterly focused on the task at hand. "Emma Kate," he said softly, "whatever happens tonight, remember that you are brave and strong and worthy of love. Remember that some fights are worth having, and some people are worth fighting for." Before she could ask what he meant, he was moving toward the door, becoming one with the shadows, disappearing into the night to face whatever dangers waited in the darkness. The 3 men retreated into the darkness after Jasper's warning shots. But Emma Kate knew they would return. What she didn't expect was to find Sheriff McKenna and 2 deputies riding up the trail at dawn, or the conversation that would change everything she thought she knew about her friend. "Jasper," McKenna called from the edge of the clearing. "We need to talk." Emma Kate watched from the cabin window as Jasper emerged from the barn, rifle still in hand but pointed downward. The events of the night had revealed another side of him, the efficient, deadly soldier who could track 3 armed men through the forest and convince them to abandon their plans with a few well-placed shots and some psychological warfare, involving animal calls and moving shadows. "Sheriff," Jasper said, his voice carrying across the morning air. Emma Kate sat in the stiff parlor of Mrs. Henderson's house, staring at the adoption papers spread across the mahogany table. 3 weeks had passed since Sheriff McKenna had taken her away from Jasper's mountain sanctuary, and every day had felt like a small death. Mrs. Henderson's house was everything the town considered proper and respectable, 2 stories of painted wood and moral rectitude. Furnished with horsehair sofas and disapproval, Emma Kate had her own room, regular meals and access to education. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt like a caged bird, her spirit slowly withering in the airless atmosphere of enforced propriety. "The papers are quite straightforward, Mr. Whitfield," the territorial magistrate was explaining to Mrs. Henderson. "Once signed and filed, Emma Kate will be legally your ward until she reaches majority. Full authority for all decisions regarding her welfare, education, and future." Emma Kate studied the documents with growing dread. The legal language was formal and cold, reducing her to a piece of property being transferred from one owner to another. There was no mention of her wishes, her feelings, or her own voice in determining her future. "And there's no possibility of the arrangement being challenged?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her sharp eyes flicking toward Emma Kate with something that might have been suspicion. "None whatsoever." The Territorial Court has reviewed all aspects of the case and found this placement to be in the child's best interests. Emma Kate wanted to argue, wanted to scream that no one had bothered to ask what she considered to be in her best interests. But 3 weeks under Mrs. Henderson's roof had taught her that such outbursts only resulted in additional restrictions and lectures about proper feminine behavior. Excellent. Mrs. Henderson lifted the pen with the air of someone completing a distasteful but necessary task. Emma Kate, you may consider yourself fortunate that decent people are willing to take responsibility for wayward children. The words stung as they were intended to. Emma Kate had been hearing variations of the same theme for weeks. How grateful she should be. How lucky she was to be rescued from her improper association with Jasper Crow. How much better her life would be under proper supervision. No one mentioned that she had been surviving quite well on her own before the town decided to intervene. No one acknowledged that her friendship with Jasper had been the first source of genuine happiness she had known since her father's death. And no one seemed to care that she felt more like a prisoner than a rescued child. A knock at the front door interrupted the signing ceremony. Mrs. Henderson frowned. She did not appreciate unexpected visitors, especially during important business. "I'll see who it is," she said, rising from her chair with obvious irritation. Emma Kate heard voices in the hallway, Mrs. Henderson's crisp tones, and a deeper voice that made her heart leap with hope and despair in equal measure. Jasper had come. He appeared in the parlor doorway looking like a man who had spent weeks wrestling with impossible decisions. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his clothes carrying the dust of hard travel, and his pale eyes held a determination that Emma Kate had never seen before. "Mr. Crow," Mrs. Henderson said icily. "This is highly irregular. Emma Kate is in the middle of important legal proceedings." "I know exactly what she's in the middle of," Jasper replied, his gaze moving to the adoption papers on the table. "And that's why I'm here." Mr. Whitfield looked up from his documents with obvious annoyance. "Sir, these proceedings are none of your concern. If you have business with the Territorial Court, you can file the appropriate papers through normal channels." "I have filed papers," Jasper said calmly, "and I believe they are very much my concern." He reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document sealed with wax and ribbons. "A petition for guardianship filed with the Territorial Court in Denver 3 days ago." Mrs. Henderson snatched the document and scanned it quickly, her face growing pale. "This is impossible." "The court has already made its decision." "The court made a decision based on incomplete information," Jasper replied. "Information that has now been corrected." Mr. Whitfield took the petition from Mrs. Henderson's trembling hands and read it carefully. Emma Kate watched his expression change from annoyance to confusion to something approaching alarm. "This can't be right," he muttered. "What does it say?" Emma Kate asked, finding her voice for the first time since Jasper's arrival. Jasper looked directly at her, his pale eyes warm with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "It says that I am petitioning the court for legal guardianship of Emma Kate on the grounds that I am her closest living relative." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Emma Kate stared at Jasper, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Your father's name was Thomas Kate," Jasper said gently. "But before he came to Colorado, before he simplified his name for business purposes, he was Thomas Crow Kate, my younger brother." Emma Kate felt the world tilt around her. Her father's brother? The family connection she had dreamed of finding, had mourned the loss of, had been sitting across from her all those evenings by the fire. "That's impossible," Mrs. Henderson sputtered. Thomas Kate had no family. He told everyone he was alone in the world. "My brother was a proud man," Jasper said, his voice heavy with old pain. "When he left home after a quarrel with our father, he swore he would make his own way in the world without help from anyone. He kept that promise, even after our parents died, even after I tried to find him and reconcile." Emma Kate's mind raced through memories of her father, looking for clues she might have missed. She remembered his skill with woodworking, so similar to Jasper's own abilities. She remembered his knowledge of wilderness survival, his way of reading weather and animal behavior. She remembered the way he would sometimes grow quiet and distant, as if remembering something painful. "But your name," she whispered. "You're Jasper Crow. Pa was Thomas Kate." "Our father was William Crow," Jasper explained. "Thomas took our mother's maiden name, Kate, when he left home. I kept our father's name." "You knew," Emma Kate said, understanding flooding through her. "All this time you knew who I was." Jasper's face was filled with regret. "Not at first. When you first told me your name, I thought it might be coincidence. Emma was our mother's name, and Kate was common enough. But when you talked about your father, about his skills and his sayings, about the way he died, I began to suspect." "When did you know for certain?" "The day you showed me his pocket watch. It was our grandfather's watch, passed down through the family. Thomas stole it when he left home." Jasper's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been looking for my brother for 20 years. Emma Kate, and I found him through you, too late to make things right with him. But not too late to take care of his daughter." Mr. Whitfield cleared his throat loudly. "Even if this claim is true, and I'm not saying it is, the court has already reviewed Mr. Crow's situation and found him unsuitable as a guardian." "The court reviewed the situation of a hermit with questionable motives," Jasper corrected. "They did not review the situation of a man seeking to care for his orphaned niece." He produced another document from his coat. "A complete family genealogy, verified by church records and territorial birth certificates. Documentation of my financial assets and property holdings. Character references from former military colleagues, business associates, and community leaders in Denver." Emma Kate watched this exchange in a daze. Her uncle. Jasper was her uncle, her father's brother, her only living family. The connection she had felt to him, the sense of belonging and recognition, suddenly made perfect sense. But beneath the joy of discovering she wasn't alone in the world was a deeper current of anger and betrayal. He had known. For weeks he had known they were family, and he had said nothing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice small but carrying clearly in the tense room. Jasper looked at her with infinite sadness. "Because I was afraid you would hate me." "Hate you? Why would I hate you?" "Because I failed your father. Because when he needed help, when he was dying, I wasn't there. Because I let pride and stubbornness keep me from finding him in time." Jasper's voice broke slightly. "Because I let you suffer for 2 years, when I could have prevented it, if I had only tried harder to locate Thomas's family." Emma Kate felt tears beginning to flow. "You didn't know." "I should have known. I should have kept looking, should have checked every Thomas Kate in every territory and state. Instead, I gave up and retreated to my mountain, wallowing in self-pity while my brother's daughter lived on the streets." The raw pain in his voice was almost unbearable. Emma Kate could see the weight of guilt he had been carrying, the knowledge that his isolation had cost them both years of family connection. Mrs. Henderson found her voice again. "This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that Mr. Crow is an unmarried man with no experience raising children. The court's concerns about propriety remain valid." "Actually," Jasper said, producing yet another document, "they don't. This paper was different from the others, smaller, more intimate, with flowing script and official seals." Emma Kate couldn't read it from where she sat, but she saw Mrs. Henderson's face go white as she scanned the contents. "What is it?" Mr. Whitfield demanded. "A marriage certificate," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "Dated 3 days ago. Between Jasper William Crow and—" She looked up at Jasper in shock. "And Margaret Henley." Emma Kate's mind reeled. Doc Henley's wife? Jasper had married Doc Henley's wife. "Margaret is a widow," Jasper explained, seeing her confusion. "Her first husband died 15 years ago before she married Doc Henley. When I explained the situation, she agreed to a marriage of convenience, a legal arrangement that would provide Emma Kate with proper female supervision while allowing me to serve as her guardian." "But what about Doc Henley?" Emma Kate asked. "The good doctor has been wanting to retire and move to Denver for years," Jasper replied. "Margaret's marriage to me will allow them to do so comfortably. The arrangement benefits everyone involved. Mr. Whitfield was studying the marriage certificate with growing disbelief. This is highly irregular. Marriage for the sole purpose of legal guardianship is perfectly legal, Jasper interrupted. Margaret and I have both entered into this arrangement voluntarily and with full understanding of its purpose. We have established separate households on my property, and she has agreed to serve as Emma Kate's female guardian and educational supervisor. Emma Kate tried to process all these revelations. In the space of an hour, she had learned that Jasper was her uncle, that he had married a woman she barely knew, and that he was fighting to overturn the guardianship arrangements that would have separated them forever. "The court will never approve this," Mrs. Henderson said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The court," Jasper replied, "has already approved it, pending final review of the documentation, which I expect to be completed within the week." He looked directly at Emma Kate. "If you want it to be approved, if you want to come home, the choice was hers." Emma Kate could see that now. For the first time since Sheriff McKenna had taken her away from the mountain, she had real options. She could stay with Mrs. Henderson, accept the safe but stifling life that had been planned for her. Or she could trust Jasper again, trust in the family connection that had been revealed, trust that the pain and deception of the past weeks could be overcome. "I want to come home," she said simply. The words seemed to drain all the tension from Jasper's body. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Emma Kate saw tears threatening. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance to do right by you, by your father's memory." Mrs. Henderson stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This entire proceeding has been a waste of time. Mr. Whitfield, I assume these developments invalidate our arrangement?" The magistrate was carefully reviewing all of Jasper's documents. "If the territorial court approves Mr. Crow's petition, and based on this documentation, I believe they will, then yes, the guardianship will be transferred to him and his wife." "Fine." Mrs. Henderson's voice was sharp with wounded pride. "Emma Kate, gather your things. I see no reason to prolong this awkward situation." But Emma Kate was already moving toward Jasper, drawn by an invisible cord of blood and affection, and the promise of finally, truly, going home. As she reached him, he opened his arms, and she fell into them with a sob of relief. He held her tightly, and she could feel him trembling with emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry for all the lies, all the deception, all the time we lost. I promise you, Emma Kate, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the uncle your father would have wanted you to have." Emma Kate pulled back to look at his face. Seeing in his pale eyes the same mixture of strength and vulnerability she remembered from her father, family, blood of her blood, the last connection to the man who had shaped her understanding of right and wrong. "Uncle Jasper," she said, testing the words. He smiled through his tears. "That sounds better than I ever imagined it could." As they prepared to leave Mrs. Henderson's house, Emma Kate felt as if she were shedding an old skin, stepping out of a life that had never quite fit into one that had been waiting for her all along. The adoption papers lay forgotten on the mahogany table, unsigned and irrelevant. The real papers, the ones that would make her Emma Kate Crow, niece and ward of Jasper William Crow, were already filed and approved. She was going home. Finally, truly, going home. The new dress felt foreign against Emma Kate's skin as she stood before the territorial judge in Denver's courthouse. The fabric was fine blue wool, expertly tailored to fit her slight frame, with pearl buttons and lace trim that spoke of careful attention and considerable expense. Margaret Henley, now Margaret Crow, had insisted on purchasing it for this occasion, saying that Emma Kate should look her best when the court made its final decision. But despite the dress's beauty, Emma Kate felt uncomfortable in its unfamiliar elegance. She had grown accustomed to simpler clothing, to fabrics chosen for practicality rather than appearance. The dress was a symbol of the changes coming to her life, some welcome, others still uncertain. Judge Harrison was a stern man in his 60s, with silver hair and penetrating grey eyes that seemed to see through pretense and artifice. He had spent the morning reviewing documents, questioning witnesses, and examining the circumstances that had brought them all to this courtroom. "Miss Emma Kate," he said, his voice carrying the authority of the territorial court. "Do you understand why we are here today?" "Yes, Your Honor." Emma Kate had been coached on proper courtroom behavior, but her voice still sounded small in the large, formal room. "Explain it to me in your own words." Emma Kate glanced at Jasper, who nodded encouragingly from where he sat beside his attorney. "My uncle, Mr. Jasper Crow, is asking the court to name him as my legal guardian, and I would like that very much. And why do you want Mr. Crow to serve as your guardian?" The question opened a floodgate of emotions that Emma Kate had been holding back for weeks. "Because he's my family, Your Honor. He's the only family I have left. And because he cares about me, truly cares, not just about doing his duty or looking proper to other people." Judge Harrison made a note on the papers before him. "I understand that Mr. Crow's relationship to you was not immediately known. Can you tell me how you first met?" Emma Kate took a breath, remembering that cold morning when she had found Bear injured by the old mill. "I found his dog hurt in the snow, Your Honor. Bear, that's the dog's name, was badly wounded and I could have kept him for companionship. But his collar had Mr. Crow's name on it, and I knew the right thing to do was return him to his owner, even though doing so required a dangerous journey into the mountains." "Yes, sir? My father taught me that doing right doesn't depend on whether it's easy or safe." The judge's expression softened slightly. "And what happened when you returned the dog?" "Mr. Crow, Uncle Jasper, was surprised to see me, but he was grateful for what I'd done, and he could see that I was—" Emma Kate searched for the right words. "He could see that I needed help, even though I was trying to manage on my own, so he helped you. He fed me, gave me warm clothes, taught me skills that might keep me alive. He never made me feel like charity or a burden." Emma Kate's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "He made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth caring about." Judge Harrison turned to Jasper. "Mr. Crow, why didn't you immediately reveal your relationship to the child?" Jasper rose to his feet, his courtroom attire lending him a dignity that was somehow enhanced rather than disguised by his mountain-weathered features. "Your Honor, I wasn't certain of the relationship at first. When I began to suspect, I was afraid that if I was wrong, I would be raising hopes that couldn't be fulfilled. And if I was right—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "If I was right, then I had failed in my duty to my brother and his child for years. I wanted Emma Kate to know me, to trust me for who I was, before she learned about family obligations and expectations. Some might argue that your deception was manipulative, Mr. Crow, that you used the child's vulnerable position to form an attachment before revealing your true circumstances." Emma Kate saw Jasper flinch at the accusation, and she felt a surge of protective anger. "Your Honor?" "Yes, Miss Emma Kate. May I say something about that?" Judge Harrison nodded. "Please do. Uncle Jasper never tried to manipulate me or take advantage of me. Not once, not ever." Emma Kate's voice carried a conviction that filled the courtroom. "He could have told me he was wealthy and offered me an easy life in exchange for gratitude. Instead, he taught me how to take care of myself. He could have demanded affection because we were related. Instead, he earned it by being kind and patient and respectful." She looked directly at the judge, her young face serious and determined. "The people who say he deceived me, they're the same people who wanted to separate us. They don't understand that real family isn't about blood or money or what looks proper to other folks. It's about choosing to care for each other, even when it's hard, even when it costs something." The courtroom was silent as Emma Kate's words sank in. Judge Harrison made another note, then looked up at the small crowd of observers in the gallery. "I understand there are those who oppose this guardianship arrangement," he said. "Mrs. Henderson, you wish to speak?" Mrs. Henderson rose from her seat, her spine rigid with disapproval. Emma Kate felt her stomach clench as the woman who had made her life miserable for 3 weeks prepared to argue against her chance for happiness. "Your Honor," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying across the courtroom with crisp authority. I have serious concerns about placing a young girl in the care of a man who has deliberately isolated himself from civilized society for 20 years. Emma Kate felt her heart sink. She had hoped that the revelation of their family relationship would end all opposition. But clearly, Mrs. Henderson was not ready to concede defeat. Mr. Crow may be the child's uncle by blood, Mrs. Henderson continued, but blood relationship does not automatically confer fitness for guardianship. This is a man who has avoided all social contact, who has shown no interest in community involvement, who has never demonstrated any ability to raise a child. Judge Harrison listened impassively. What specific concerns do you have, Mrs. Henderson? Education, Your Honor. How can a hermit provide proper schooling for a growing girl? Social development. How will she learn to interact appropriately with others if she's raised in isolation? Moral guidance. What kind of feminine virtues can she learn from a man who has rejected the civilizing influence of proper society? Emma Kate wanted to object, to point out that Jasper had taught her more in a few months than she had learned in years of struggling alone. But court protocol required her to remain silent unless directly questioned. Mrs. Henderson was warming to her theme. Furthermore, Your Honor, there are the practical considerations of Mr. Crow's marriage of convenience to Mrs. Margaret Henley. This arrangement may satisfy the letter of the law regarding female supervision, but it hardly provides the stable family environment a child needs. Mrs. Crow is present in the courtroom, Judge Harrison noted. Perhaps she should speak for herself. Margaret rose from her seat beside Jasper. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying brown hair and kind eyes that reminded Emma Kate of her late husband, Doc Henley. Her voice was steady and confident as she addressed the court. Your Honor, I entered into marriage with Mr. Crow with full knowledge of the circumstances and complete willingness to serve as guardian to Emma Kate. While our arrangement may be unconventional, it is grounded in mutual respect and shared commitment to the child's welfare. And you believe you can provide adequate supervision and guidance? I do, Your Honor. I raised 2 daughters of my own, both now grown and married. I have experience in education. I taught school for 15 years before my first marriage. And I have observed Emma Kate closely enough to know that she is a remarkable young woman who needs guidance and opportunity, not restriction and conformity. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed with anger. Your Honor, these people are asking the court to approve an arrangement that flies in the face of every standard of proper child-rearing. A hermit, a widow who married for convenience, and a girl who has spent 2 years living like a street urchin. This is not a recipe for successful guardianship. Judge Harrison turned his attention back to Emma Kate. Miss Emma Kate, you have heard Mrs. Henderson's concerns. How do you respond? Emma Kate stood, feeling the weight of the blue dress and the even greater weight of the decision before the court. This was her chance to speak for herself, to have a voice in determining her own future. Your Honor, she began, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Mrs. Henderson is worried about my education, but Uncle Jasper has a library with more books than I've ever seen in one place. He's taught me about history, about nature, about skills that might save my life someday. Mrs. Margaret has already begun working with me on mathematics and literature, and she knows more about teaching than anyone in Cedar Ridge. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Mrs. Henderson is worried about my social development, but I learned more about kindness and respect in Uncle Jasper's cabin than I did in 3 weeks in her house. He treats me like a person worth listening to, worth teaching, worth caring about. That seems like pretty good social development to me. Emma Kate's voice grew stronger as she continued. And she's worried about moral guidance. But Uncle Jasper taught me that doing right matters more than looking proper, that taking care of others is more important than protecting yourself, that family is about choosing to love people, not just sharing their blood. She looked directly at Mrs. Henderson. Ma'am, you gave me a roof over my head and regular meals, and I'm grateful for that. But you never once asked what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what I hoped for in life. You decided what was best for me, without ever wondering if I might have my own ideas about that. Judge Harrison made another note. "And what do you hope for, Miss Emma Kate?" The question opened Emma Kate's heart completely. "I hope to have a real family again, Your Honor. People who care about me not because it's their duty, but because they choose to. I hope to learn everything Uncle Jasper can teach me about the mountains and the wilderness and taking care of myself. I hope to help Mrs. Margaret with her teaching and maybe become a teacher myself someday." She felt tears threatening, but forced herself to continue. "Most of all, Your Honor, I hope to have the chance to take care of the people I love, the way my father taught me, the way Uncle Jasper has shown me. I hope to be worth the trouble they're taking to keep me." The courtroom was silent for a long moment. Emma Kate could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the collective breathing of everyone present. The judge wrote something on his papers, then looked up with an expression that was impossible to read. "Mrs. Henderson," he said finally, "your concerns are not without merit. Unconventional guardianship arrangements can indeed present challenges." Emma Kate's heart sank. Was he going to rule against them? "However," Judge Harrison continued, "this court has observed that conventional arrangements do not always serve children's best interests either. I have reviewed the documentation provided by Mr. Crow, including character references from military colleagues, financial statements proving his ability to provide for the child, and educational plans developed in consultation with Mrs. Crow." He looked directly at Emma Kate. "More importantly, I have listened to Miss Emma Kate herself. She's clearly an intelligent, articulate young woman who has demonstrated remarkable resilience and judgment. Her own wishes regarding her future carry considerable weight with this court." Emma Kate held her breath, afraid to hope too much. "Therefore," Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying the full authority of territorial law, "I am prepared to approve the guardianship petition, subject to certain conditions." Emma Kate felt her knees go weak with relief, but the judge was continuing. "First, Emma Kate will receive formal education either through private tutoring or enrollment in an established school. Second, the family will maintain regular contact with territorial authorities to ensure the child's continued welfare. Third, Mrs. Crow will serve as primary supervisor for all matters relating to Emma Kate's social and educational development." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. "These conditions are non-negotiable. Do you accept them?" "We do, Your Honor," Jasper said immediately. "Yes, Your Honor," Margaret added. Emma Kate found her voice. "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you." Judge Harrison smiled for the first time during the hearing. "Then it is the ruling of this court that Emma Kate shall be placed in the legal guardianship of Mr. Jasper William Crow and Mrs. Margaret Henley Crow." Effective immediately, the gavel fell with a sound like thunder, and Emma Kate felt as if the whole world had suddenly shifted on its axis. Legal guardianship, a real family, a future that stretched ahead, filled with possibilities instead of mere survival. Jasper was suddenly beside her, lifting her into his arms in the embrace that spoke of years of longing and loss finally resolved. Margaret was there too, her eyes bright with tears, her arms encompassing both of them. "Thank you," Emma Kate whispered to them both. "Thank you for fighting for me." "Thank you," Jasper replied, his voice rough with emotion, "for giving me the chance to be part of a family again." As they left the courthouse together, Emma Kate caught sight of herself in a window reflection. The fine blue dress no longer felt foreign. It felt like the clothing of Emma Kate Crow, beloved niece, cherished ward, integral part of a family that had chosen to love her. The girl in threadbare rags, who had struggled alone on Cedar Ridge's streets, was gone forever. In her place stood someone new, someone who belonged. Someone who was wanted, someone who had finally, truly, come home. The wedding ring felt strange in Emma Kate's palm as she stood in the mountain cemetery where her father lay buried. The ring was simple gold, worn thin by years of wear, and it belonged to the woman Jasper had loved and lost 20 years ago, his first wife, Sarah, who had died along with their infant daughter in the fever epidemic that had driven him into the mountains. Margaret had suggested this moment of closure, before they began their new life together as a family. "Some things need to be laid to rest properly," she had said with the wisdom of someone who had also lost a spouse, "so that new things can grow in their place." Jasper knelt beside his first wife's grave, brushing snow away from the weathered headstone that read simply, "Sarah Elizabeth Crowe, beloved wife and mother, 1847-1867. Beside it was a smaller stone, Mary Catherine Crowe, our angel, 1867. "I've been carrying this for 20 years, he said quietly, holding up the ring, carrying it like a chain, like proof that I didn't deserve to be happy again. Emma Kate watched as he placed the ring gently on the snow-covered mound. "But I think Sarah would want me to let go now, would want me to choose life instead of just surviving." The wind moved through the pine trees surrounding the small cemetery, creating a sound like whispered blessings. Emma Kate stepped closer to her father's grave, where Thomas Kate's headstone bore the simple inscription, "Thomas Crowe Kate, beloved father, 1838-1885. Pa," she said softly, "I found him. I found your brother, just like you always hoped I would. And he found me too, though it took us a while to figure out we belonged together." She knelt beside the grave, brushing away snow to reveal the small wooden bird she had carved and left there months ago. Her first successful attempt at the craft Jasper had taught her. "He's going to take care of me, Pa, the way you would have if you'd lived. And I'm going to take care of him too, because that's what family does." Jasper rose from Sarah's grave and came to stand beside Emma Kate. Together, they looked down at Thomas's resting place. Two people who had found each other across years of grief and isolation. "He would be proud of you," Jasper said. "Thomas always was stubborn about doing right, no matter what it cost. I see that same strength in you. Do you think they're together now?" Emma Kate asked. "Pa and your Sarah and little Mary?" "I think they're at peace," Jasper replied. "And I think they want us to be at peace too." As they walked back toward the cabin, home now, truly home, Emma Kate felt the last pieces of her old life settling into place. The frightened girl who had struggled alone on Cedar Ridge's streets was part of her history now, but no longer her identity. She was Emma Kate Crowe, daughter of the mountains, niece to a man who had found his way back to love, ward to a woman who had chosen to share her wisdom and guidance. The cabin looked different when they approached it together. Where once it had been Jasper's refuge from the world, it was now becoming something warmer. A family home where three people who had all known loss were learning to build something new together. Margaret met them at the door, her face bright with the excitement of someone who had spent the afternoon preparing surprises. "Perfect timing," she said. "I have something to show you both." She led them to what had once been Jasper's spare room, the same room where Emma Kate had spent her first night in the mountains, frightened and uncertain about the future. Now it was transformed. The walls were painted a warm yellow, and new curtains hung at the windows. A bookshelf held texts on mathematics, literature, and natural science. A desk sat near the window, positioned to catch the best light for reading and writing. "It's beautiful," Emma Kate breathed. "It's yours," Margaret said simply. "Your room, your space, your sanctuary when you need one." But it was the final touch that brought tears to Emma Kate's eyes. On the desk, carefully positioned in the center, sat her father's pocket watch, restored, polished, and ticking steadily with renewed life. "You fixed it," she whispered, lifting the timepiece with trembling hands. Jasper nodded. "The parts came in from Denver last week. It took some careful work, but the mechanism was sound underneath the damage." Emma Kate held the watch to her ear, listening to its steady rhythm, the sound of time moving forward instead of standing still, of broken things made whole again, of second chances and new beginnings. "Time," she said, remembering her father's words. "The only thing we can't make more of, but we can make better use of what we have," Margaret added gently. As evening fell, the three of them sat by the fire in their new configuration as a family. Bear dozed contentedly at Emma Kate's feet, his injuries long healed, but his loyalty to his rescuer undiminished. Margaret worked on lesson plans for Emma Kate's education. while Jasper carved a new piece, not one of his usual animals, but something that looked like it might become a small house, complete with tiny windows and a welcoming door. "What are you making?" Emma Kate asked. "A memory," Jasper replied. "Something to remind us of how we came to be a family." Emma Kate looked around the warm cabin, at the two people who had chosen to love her, at the dog who had brought them all together, at the life that was just beginning to unfold before them. The wooden doll Jasper had carved for her sat on the mantelpiece now, its serene face catching the firelight. She thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The cold morning when she had found Bear injured by the mill. The decision to return him to his owner, despite her own desperate need for companionship. The weeks of growing trust and affection that had preceded the revelation of their family connection. All of it had led here, to this room, to this moment, to this sense of belonging that she had thought was lost forever when her father died. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words coming from someplace deeper than thought or decision. "Both of you. I love you, and I'm grateful every single day that we found each other." Margaret set down her papers and came to sit beside Emma Kate on the rug. "We love you too, sweetheart. More than you could possibly imagine." Jasper looked up from his carving, his pale eyes warm with contentment. "Your father used to say that love wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you chose to do, again and again, every single day." "Then I choose this," Emma Kate said firmly. "I choose us, I choose this family, I choose this life. Every day for as long as I live." The fire crackled in the stone hearth, Bear's breathing deepened into sleep, and somewhere in the distance a night bird called to its mate. The mountains stood eternal around them, and inside their warm cabin, three people who had been broken by loss discovered what it meant to be made whole by love. Emma Kate pulled out her father's watch and checked the time. 8:30, though it might as well have been the beginning of forever. Time was moving forward again, carrying them into a future filled with possibility, purpose, and the kind of love that chose to endure despite every obstacle. She was Emma Kate Crow now, and she was finally completely irrevocably home. 1 year later, Emma Kate stood on the front porch of the newly built Cedar Ridge School, holding the hand of 6-year-old Tommy Patterson as he faced his first day of formal education. The boy's eyes were wide with the same mixture of fear and excitement that Emma Kate remembered feeling when she had been his age, back when the world had still felt safe and full of possibilities. "It's scary," Tommy whispered, his small hand trembling in hers. "I know," Emma Kate said gently, "but scary and exciting can be the same thing sometimes. And Mrs. Margaret is the kindest teacher you could ever hope for." Through the schoolhouse windows, she could see Margaret arranging books and materials for the day's lessons. The woman who had become both stepmother and teacher to Emma Kate now served the entire community, having established the first proper school Cedar Ridge had seen in years. Her classes included children from families throughout the valley, from the banker's well-dressed daughter to the children of miners and trappers who had never before had access to formal education. "Will you come get me if I need you?" Tommy asked. Emma Kate squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I'll be right here when school ends. But Tommy, I think you're going to love it so much that you won't want to leave." As she walked the boy to the schoolhouse door, Emma Kate caught her reflection in the window glass. The girl looking back at her bore little resemblance to the frightened, half-starved child who had found Bear injured by the mill over a year ago. This Emma Kate stood straight and confident, her hair neatly braided, her dress clean and well-fitted, her eyes bright with purpose and contentment. But more than her appearance had changed. The desperate hunger that had once driven her every decision had been replaced by something much rarer, the quiet confidence of someone who knew she belonged, who understood her place in the world, who had people who would catch her if she fell. "Miss Emma Kate," called a familiar voice from across the schoolyard. She turned to see Bear bounding toward her, his tail wagging with the enthusiasm of a dog who had never quite forgotten that she had saved his life. Behind him came Jasper, leading Sage with a pack loaded with supplies for the school. "How's our newest student settling in?" Jasper asked, nodding toward Tommy, who was now chatting eagerly with some of the other children. Better than expected, Emma Kate replied. Though I think his mother is more nervous than he is. Parents usually are. Jasper's eyes crinkled with the humor Emma Kate had learned to love. I remember being terrified the first time Margaret took you down to town for a formal lesson. Kept wondering if you'd decide civilization suited you better than mountain life. Emma Kate laughed. Not likely. Though I have to admit, having the best of both worlds isn't terrible, and it was true. Over the past year, they had found a rhythm that honored both her need for education and social connection, and her deep love for the wilderness. 3 days a week, she studied with Margaret and helped teach the younger children. 2 days a week, she worked alongside Jasper, learning advanced wilderness skills and helping him with the carpentry and trading that had made him quietly prosperous. The remaining days were her own, to read, to explore, to practice the carving skills that had become her passion. The arrangement had raised eyebrows at first. Some townspeople thought it improper for a young lady to spend so much time in the mountains, learning skills they considered more suitable for men. But Emma Kate's academic achievements had silenced most criticism. She was now reading at a level far above her age. Her mathematical skills were exceptional, and her knowledge of natural science impressed even the circuit judge who visited twice yearly. More importantly, she had found ways to use her unique combination of skills to help others. When children went missing in the wilderness, she was often part of the search parties. When families needed help identifying edible plants or treating minor injuries with natural remedies, she had become the person they turned to. She was building a reputation as someone who could bridge the gap between civilized society and the wild country that surrounded it. Speaking of civilization, Jasper said, pulling a letter from his coat pocket, this came for you on yesterday's mail stage. Emma Kate recognized the formal envelope and official seal immediately. She had been expecting this correspondence, but that didn't make receiving it any less momentous. She opened the letter carefully, reading the contents twice to make sure she understood correctly. Then she looked up at Jasper with eyes bright with joy and possibility. The Territorial Education Board approved my application, she said. I can begin teacher training next year if I want to. And do you want to? Emma Kate considered the question seriously. At 14, she was already helping Margaret with the younger students, and she had discovered that she loved the moment when understanding dawned in a child's eyes. But teaching would also mean responsibilities, commitments, a more conventional life than the one she had been living. I think I do, she said finally, but not the way most people do it. I want to teach children like Tommy, like I was, the ones who might not otherwise get a chance at education. And I want to teach them about the wilderness too, not just books and arithmetic. Jasper nodded approvingly. Your father would be proud. He always said education was the one thing nobody could take away from you once you had it. They were interrupted by the sound of the school bell, and Emma Kate watched as children hurried inside for the beginning of their lessons. Through the window, she could see Margaret greeting each student by name, her face warm with the genuine affection that had made her such an effective teacher. I should go help, Emma Kate said, but Jasper caught her arm gently. Before you do, I have something for you. He reached into the pack he had been carrying and pulled out a small wooden box, beautifully crafted and polished to a warm glow. Emma Kate recognized the workmanship immediately. This was Jasper's finest work, created with the kind of careful attention he reserved for only the most important projects. What is it? She asked, accepting the box with reverence. Open it and see. Inside the box, nestled in soft velvet, was a photograph. The image was formal, posed in the style common to professional photographers, but the subjects' faces glowed with genuine happiness. Emma Kate saw herself standing between Jasper and Margaret, all three of them dressed in their best clothes, all three of them smiling with the quiet contentment of people who had found exactly where they belonged. But it was the inscription at the bottom of the photograph that brought tears to her eyes. The Crow family. Cedar Ridge, Colorado Territory, 1888. Our first family portrait, Jasper said softly. I thought it was time we had one. Emma Kate traced the edge of the photograph with one finger, marveling at the way the camera had captured not just their faces, but something of the bond that connected them. They looked like what they were, people who had chosen each other, who had built something precious from the wreckage of loss and loneliness. It's perfect, she whispered. Thank you. Thank you, Jasper replied, for giving me the chance to be part of a family again, for teaching an old hermit that some risks are worth taking. As Emma Kate made her way into the schoolhouse, she carried the photograph with her, planning to show it to Margaret during their lunch break. But first, she had work to do, lessons to help teach, children to encourage, knowledge to share. She found Tommy Patterson sitting at one of the smaller desks, still looking slightly overwhelmed, but no longer frightened. When he saw her, his face brightened. Miss Emma Kate, Mrs. Margaret, says you're going to teach us about plants and animals and how to find our way in the forest. That's right, Emma Kate said, settling into the chair beside him. Would you like that? Yes. My pa says you know more about the wilderness than anybody, even the trappers and hunters. Emma Kate smiled, remembering her own hunger for knowledge, her own excitement at discovering new skills and ideas. Well then, we'd better get started. There's a whole world out there waiting for us to explore. As Margaret began the day's lessons, Emma Kate looked around the classroom filled with eager young faces and felt a deep sense of purpose settling into her bones. This was what she had been moving toward all along, not just her own education and survival, but the chance to help others find their own paths to knowledge and growth. Through the window, she could see Jasper working on his latest project, a set of carved animals for the school's natural science collection. Bear lay in a patch of sunlight nearby, content to keep his master company. The mountains rose eternal in the distance, holding their secrets and their beauty, waiting for new generations of children to discover their wonders. The broken pocket watch her father had left her now ticked steadily on the desk beside her, keeping perfect time, marking the moments as they passed from present into memory and back into possibility. Time was moving forward, carrying them all toward futures they could barely imagine. But Emma Kate was no longer afraid of what those futures might hold. She was Emma Kate Crow, daughter of the mountains, student and teacher, bridge between the civilized world and the wild country that surrounded it. She had found her family, her purpose, her place in the great story that connected all living things. And every morning when she woke in her warm bed, in her safe home, surrounded by people who loved her, she remembered the scared, hungry girl who had found an injured dog in the snow and chosen kindness over survival. Sometimes, Emma Kate reflected as she helped Tommy with his first letters. The smallest acts of courage changed everything. Sometimes, when you had the least to give, that was exactly when giving mattered most. Sometimes, the best things in life began with a simple decision to do the right thing, even when nobody was watching, even when it cost you something you could barely afford to lose. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that decision led you home.